facilitated by GYBN Caribbean. Today, we'll delve into the topic, impact of human interaction on protected areas. Introduction to invasive species. My name is Kimora Payne, and I'm honored to be your moderator for this session. We're excited to have you join us as we explore this vital topic. Before we begin, let me share a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentations, and you're welcome to ask questions, and we'll address them during the designated session. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel of speakers. Biologist with a master's degree in marine sciences from Zhejiang University, China. She brings extensive expertise in biodiversity conservation, marine resource management, and sustainable development. Currently serving with Guyana's Ministry of Natural Resources, Maria contributes to policy formulation, environmental impact assessments, and the gas-to-energy project. Beyond her professional work, she actively supports the Protected Areas Commission and has led impactful initiatives to preserve Guyana's rich biodiversity. Maria is also a published researcher, experienced educator, and dedicated advocate for youth and environmental development. Secondly, we have Nathan Wilson, who has served as an invasive species officer at the Environmental Awareness Group, EAG, for over 4 years. Combines his deep passion for science with his commitment to conservation. Fascinated by the intricate systems that sustain life, Nathan's work focuses on protecting Antigua and Barbuda's natural environment and wildlife, including critically endangered species like the Antiguan racer and Redonda's endemic lizards. Finally, Maria Hernandez is a passionate champion of biodiversity conservation and an active leader within the Global Biodiversity Network. As co-coordinator of GYBN's Dominican Republic chapter and a technical specialist in invasive alien species management at the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources in the Dominican Republic, Maria plays a crucial role in protecting native ecosystems. With a background in biology, she has participated in global biodiversity conferences, collaborating with youth communities and governments to promote impactful conservation initiatives. Her work centers on sustainability, ecological restoration, and empowering others to safeguard the planet. Together, this panel of experts brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and passion for biodiversity conservation, sustainability, and environmental stewardship. Please join me in welcoming them. In that order, we'll now go into our presentations by our esteemed panelists. Ms. Maria, Fraser.
All right, good day or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that great introduction and thank you for having me as a panelist. Let me share my screen and let me know if you can see it. Can you see the full thing there? Awesome, great. So once again, guys, good afternoon. I am Maria Fraser. I'm from Guyana, and today we're going to be talking about the protected areas and some of the invasive species that are present within the protected areas in Guyana. But first of all, let's talk about what is a protected area. We know a protected area is basically a region that is set aside for conservation of biodiversity and its ecosystem. And of course, we have management, we have maintenance, expanding protected areas. Now in Guyana, there are 5 protected areas and 4 urban parks. This photo here, if you can see here, this is an marine protected area, which is called Canachin, located down south of Guyana. Then we have Shell Beach, which is a tip of Guyana. It's basically the only coastal protected area for 4 of the sea turtles that nest there. Then we have the Kanuku Mountains, famous for the harp eagles. And then here we have the Kaitro Fall, which is one of the wonders of the world and the largest single drop waterfalls. And then over here we have the zoo, or we can say the urban parks, which pretty much we have 4. Now, let me tell you about the Protected Areas Commission. They basically fall under the office of the presidency, and their mandate or main function is to manage protected areas, maintain, expand, and of course, promote the protected areas. Outline here, am I not next in? Okay, is basically what Guyana looks like and the areas where the protected areas are situated. So the tip here, we have Shell Beach, which I mentioned before. Here we have the Kaieteur Fall, which is in Region 8. Then we have the Kanuku Mountains all the way at the bottom, which is mostly into the savanna areas. Likewise, Kanashan at all the way at the bottom of Guyana. We have Arakrama International. It's in the heart of Guyana. It's always considered as a green heart. That's one of the area where we have sustainable management and conservation of our biodiversity. And then we have our urban parks located on the coast of Guyana where 90% of our population lives. So moving forward, what is an invasive species? Now, we've been hearing the word invasive. Invasive basically refers to a non-native organism, whether it's a plant, an animal, or a microbe that is introduced into the environment where it spreads rapidly and it causes harm to the native species or the native ecosystem there. It hampers the biodiversity and, of course, the entire health of that existing ecosystem. These species often lack natural predators or competitors, allowing them to dominate in this new particular habitat. Some of the characteristics when you look at invasive species, like I mentioned, they don't have a predator, they don't have any competition. So obviously they're going to reproduce at an excessive rate at which we cannot control. They're highly adaptable to new environment. They outcompete the other native species for the resources. They alter that ecosystem, and of course, they spread rapidly without any sort of control. Now, invasive species existed in the early, pre-1500s or even before that. I can give you a little date back. I think it would have been in a Roman Empire day, when they were, transporting their crops, livestock, and exotic animals across from, and there's where we had the unintentional spreading of species, like we had the black rats, for example. There was the pigs and the rats for certain areas were introduced in particular areas that basically declined the native birds. Moving forward, we had the age of colonization, which is around the 1500s to the 1800s. This here you'll talk about, we can see when during the Columbian exchange, this is around the post of 1492, which led to the global transfer of species, which include native. For example, one of those would have been the famous cane toads. I think Caribbean people would say it's mountain chicken. It's like these giant toads. You can find, which is pretty much found in the sugar estates and so on. Anyways, moving forward, there was so many other species in contact, people who direct, into their country for whatever purpose. And this was basically moved me on to the next slide, which talks about economic control and soil stabilization, pest control and agriculture. When we talk about the erosion and control and stabilization, back in the days, people would say, hey, you know what? We're having terrible erosion for this particular area. Maybe we can bring this plant from Africa or next part of the world into the Caribbean. And this plant, like if I pronounce it correctly, the kazoo, they were introduced to prevent soil erosion, and it happened to grow so fast that it actually stabilized and degrade the land. It stabilized and degrades the land, although they cannot outcompete the native species. So this is an example of a vine that grows everywhere and anywhere. We also had pest control as an example. I remember in the sugar industry, there was snakes, lots of rattlesnakes, which was introduced to control the rats. Um, then, because of the excessive amount of rattlesnakes in the sugar industry, mongoose was introduced, and it became an invasive species in Guyana. And they're still there, still existing, and there are no other predator for them, perhaps humans, because humans tend to eat everything. But so far, they have been none. In terms of the economic and agriculture use, we had examples like tilapia. Tilapia is an invasive species that was introduced into the fishing sectors or for agriculture back then. And it's usually farmed for human consumption, which creates economic benefits. But I can remember I think it's the early 2005 when Guyana experienced a flood. They, from the coastline, so it went across the coast of Guyana, which eventually became an invasive species. But I'll talk more about that in the following slides. So I talk about the why they're introduced, how it affects and some of the examples of invasive species being introduced. And I can mention here that we can look at it as indirect or direct. So direct would be human activity where persons can introduce that particular organism into an ecosystem for what it's for economic purpose, for pest control, or for agriculture purposes. And those were some of the examples. Indirect, we talk about climate change. We can look at tourism, of course, shipping, and trade and transport. So, for example, tourism, which is basically the unintended area to the wild. So around the world, there are many different types of invasive species. I've listed 3, and we're gonna talk about that. So the first one, cane toad, like I mentioned this was pretty much introduced to Australia in 1935 to control sugarcane pests. The cane toad has since then extensively become a significant invasive species. And they impact protected areas across the globe, such as the wet tropics world heritage area, where they poison predators and of course they compete with other native species. We have the famous python, and I think we probably heard stories of where they were introduced into Australia. Now it's actually an invasive species there. And that was a very simple story. It was somebody's pet, and it just happened to got loose, and there we go. This unintentional activity lead to invasion in Australia. Of course, these pythons, they cause significant decline in mammal and of course our bird population. It causes ecocides. This is basically where it's reduced feral cats. Now these are very slightly different from our regular domestic cats. So you can see here there is a circle around. There's always that chip on the ears. Their coat is extra clean and silky and shiny, and they are never friendly to humans. And these guys, they're basically invasive to many areas, and I think the Galapagos Islands in Ecuador, they're invasive there. They hunt the endemic bird species, which contribute to their decline. Of course, these guys can transmit disease, and they're predators, of course, to the bird, reptiles, and even small mammals, leading to their population decline and even extinction. So those are 3 examples around the world. Maybe my other colleagues would talk more about that. But let's get into invasive species in Guyana protected area. Now, I mentioned that we got 5 protected areas and 4 urban parks. Now, throughout Guyana, there's a list of invasive species, which can be found on the EPA website and the IUCN invasive listed species. So I'm going to talk about three. So as we know, many invasive species reproduce quickly and they lack natural predator in their new environment, which basically allow their population to grow uncontrollably. Even the national parks and the conservation areas are immune, as invasive species disrupt the food chain and, of course, threaten or endangered species. So let's take, for example, let's go to the first one. We'll talk about the antelope grass. You guys probably have heard about the antelope grass, probably have seen the antelope grass quite a lot along the edges of the trench or even in trenches or rivers. So these guys were pretty much introduced into Guyana for a simple purpose, for farming, basically for the cows. Cows rely a lot on these antelope grass because it contributes to their high productivity in their milk production. But there's at some point in time that our ecosystem cannot manage the amount of antelope grass, and they have a very a rapid life cycle. I think it's every 28 days that they see produce, and they travel, they disperse through wind, even through agricultural materials, or even they can stick onto your clothes and you end up in a protected areas and they're there. Nevertheless, these guys, antelope grass, they are dense strand and they overcompete the native plant species in that particular area. They alter the hydrology of the water, basically changes the water flow patterns in wetland, affecting the aquatic habitat. Today, they are basically present in the Rupununi wetland, and even they're found in the Kaieteur National Park, which is one of our protected area. Again, they alter the water flow pattern, leading to the reduced biodiversity, well, aquatic biodiversity. Because when it's very simple. If grass is on top of the water, they block light from entering the water. Therefore, it deprives oxygen. If it deprives oxygen in the water, what happens to our marine or aquatic species living there? They eventually die. They suffer, they move to another location, or they die. So again, we have some ecological balances there. Then we have the mongoose, like I explained to you earlier. You know, these are small, remind me a lot of Timon and Pumbaa. You know, they're very cute, but at the same time, they're all over the place and you could see them from time to time. Well, these guys, they spread rapidly across Guyana. They are also found in 4 of our protected areas, which is a Kaieteur National Park, Aracrama, the Kanuku Mountains, and Shell Beach. I can give you an example of the Shell Beach, for example. Mongoose, again, they're dominant, they're predators. They love snakes, reptiles, I would say. So these guys, you know, can prey on the endangered sea turtles, which contributes, you know, to the decline in hatchling survival rates. But the Protected Areas Commission, sorry, they have been working on a hatchery and a control so that these guys won't come and, you know, eat the eggs out. In the Kanuku Mountain, they compete with other predators like the tyra, and this, of course, affects the ecosystem balances. So moving on to the last one, the last example, and it's called acacias, which again, it's a type of plant. It was introduced from Australia in the 1970s, and this was basically was introduced for the revegetation of mining sites. So areas in Guyana, like the interior, there's a lot of mining activities that occur, and one crazy biologist or scientist said, you know what? Let's bring in this type of plant. It's gonna reproduce rapidly and it's gonna help to rebuild our mining area and it's gonna build back our, you know, ecosystem. Fantastic idea. But then what they realized after that happened, they tend to spread so much that it actually destroyed other native plant species in that particular area. And what was also observed too is that, the change in vegetation structure can affect the natural fire cycle. And this is probably one of the reasons why we've had, tremendous forest fire last year during the dry season. So they're a natural fire hazard at the same time. But these guys are found in the Kanuku Mountains. And, like I said, they outcompete the other three species and basically reducing habitat for our birds and mammals. So that's it basically for our invasive species in Guyana. Okay. Oh, yes. So I want to touch a little bit on the carrying capacity if I do have some time remaining. Carrying capacity is basically the capacity at which an environment or its maximum population size of a biological species can sustain by that specific environment or ecosystem, given that food, habitat, and water and other resources are available. Now, let's take, for example, I want to use the example of the armored catfish, which is locally known as hassel, and the other one, tilapia. I mentioned before that tilapia is an invasive species, and it was introduced from Africa into Guyana and even the wider Caribbean, basically for aquaculture or fish farming. Now, what we noticed during that period of time is that when we introduce tilapia has a very how to say short life cycle and a high reproductive rate, and they all compete the hassles in that particular area. So they reproduce at a very interesting rate. So this is what you call your lag time, your exponentialness when it started to grow. Then it reached to this part where this is your basically carrying capacity, where it meets the environmental target. Now, if so many tilapias is being reproduced at an excessive rate, and those little other hassles are in there. We got 10 hassles, 10 tilapia. It takes hassle maybe, this is just an average, just for you to understand. Hassle takes a year to have 5, fingerling, whereas a tilapia takes 6 months to get 40 fingerling. What would you think would happen? Basically, tilapia, it competes with the hassle. The hassle feels, that we're not surviving. It doesn't make sense, and it forces the ecosystem, basically the health of that ecosystem forces that hassle out of that environment. Hence, tilapia becomes dominant. So of course, some other characteristics that leads to that too is that tilapia, they disturbs the aquatic ecosystem by aggressively digging up river beds or the soil while nesting, which leads to increased sedimentation and poor water quality, making the environment so unbearable for the other organism to live. So that's basically in a nutshell about the carrying capacity and examples of how it works. So in that thing, I've listed some mitigation strategies that was suggested that we can take prevention, we can manage, and community involvement is very important when it comes to how we can mitigate or prevent or manage invasive species. Somebody once told me that when we talk about conservation is not just stopping things from happening. It also comes with two parts of it. One would be education, the other would be in livelihood. So in this part of it, it's when we talk about community involvement, we talk about education. We need to, make aware of what is happening in our ecosystem, understand our ecosystem, and then of course share your information with that community so that the community can also help you to manage and prevent any future incidents of invasive species. So with that said, this brings me to the end of my presentation. Of course, we know invasive species can threaten, well, invasive species does threaten any protected areas, of course, by disrupting their ecosystem and biodiversity. And human activities is basically the main driver. But through proactive measures, we can definitely mitigate their impact. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this was informative for you. Feel free to ask me any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Maria, for that insightful presentation. You've given us a lot to think about, from the impact of invasive species to how human activities contribute to their spread. It's clear that this isn't just a global issue, it's something we're dealing with here right in the Caribbean's protected areas. What really stood out is the importance of mitigation, whether through prevention, management, or getting communities involved. Tackling invasive species isn't just about reacting, it's about being proactive in protecting our ecosystems. With that, let's move on to Mr. Nathan, who will continue the discussion.
Good day, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay, thanks for having me as one of the panelists on this discussion. So I will get right into it. And everyone can see my screen? Okay, so I'll talk a little about the EAG and then I'll get into the meat of the matter. So we are one of Antigua and Barbuda's oldest environmental NGOs, and we've been at the forefront of conservation work for over 30 years. And our tagline, it's for the benefit of people and wildlife. And basically, it's our aim to have a society where everyone cares for and values the ecosystems and wildlife of Antigua and Barbuda. So we believe that environmental work should not only be worthwhile, but interesting and satisfying with a hint of adventure. At the EAG, we have 3 programs that are focused more on conservation in the field. So there's the Offshore Islands Conservation Program, the Redonda Ecosystem Reserve, and the Antigua Marine Conservation Program. So I'll speak mostly about the first 2 because they both have invasive species control as a core activity. Sure, I'm not seeing your screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Oh, no? It's not shared. Okay, go to shared.
No, I cannot see your.
Oh, I did forget to press it. Sorry about that. Totally forgot to click share. Okay. Okay, so we'll talk about the offshore islands. Yeah, so we'll talk about the Offshore Islands Conservation Program. So in this photo, this is Great Bird Island. This is basically an important role in the formation of the Offshore Islands Conservation Program. Okay, so the area of focus is within the Northeast Marine Management Area, and that is the country's 2nd largest legally protected area. And within the NEMA, we have 28 offshore islands, and they're a mix of private and state-owned. So the NEMA was legally designated as a marine reserve in 2005, whereas OICP was founded in 2001. There's a story behind it. So the NEMA is basically a key biodiversity area and an important bird and biodiversity area. And also, it's one of Antigua and Barbuda's top tourist attractions. Thousands of tourists come to the NEMA every year. You will have also boats more offshore of many of the islands, Great Bird Island included. And nearly all of these islands have been colonized by black rats at some point. So a lot of the work we do, our most important islands conservation-wise would be the Great Bird Island, Green Island, and York Island. And there are other islands that we do conservation work on. But these three islands are home to the Antiguan racer in sizable populations, so they're very important to us. So we have to talk about how the rats got to the offshore islands. So they first arrived in the 1800s with the settlers, the European settlers, and they basically became pests for the British because they were destroying their cane fields and so on. So Antigua was actually once home to several species of endemic biodiversity. We had a boring owl, we had parrot, we had a curly-tailed lizard, and of course we had the Antiguan racer. But because the British considered the rats pests, they brought the small Indian mongoose to control the rats. But of course, the mongoose didn't get the memo, so they weren't just killing the rats. They actually were instrumental in making the boring owl, Antiguan parrot, and the curly-tailed lizard extinct, and other native species. The Antiguan racer, it can no longer be found on the mainland because of this, and it was also declared extinct twice. But in 1993, a young officer from the forestry unit, Antigua's forestry unit, he went over to Great Bird Island because he had been hearing stories that the Antiguan racer was still around. So when he went there, it was indeed true. And after that, there were accelerated efforts to form a project to protect the racer. So this led to the formation of the Antiguan Racer Conservation Project, and that was in 1995. So what they did an eradication on Great Bird Island. Basically, you cut trails across the island and you use poison bait to basically kill the rat. It's a slow-acting poison, which allows the rat to basically feed its young so that basically everyone gets killed as humanely as possible. So this ended up as a resounding success in the long term because at the beginning in 1995, there were 50 Antiguan races on Great Bird Island, but this number expanded to as much as 1,200 by 2015. But of course, sometimes when you do something in an ecosystem, you will actually find that there are other benefits, and this was the case also with Great Bird Island. We found that other wildlife benefited from the removal of the rats. And because of this increase in scope, the Antigua Racer Conservation Project became the Offshore Islands Conservation Program in 2001. So just to give you a short description of what has been happening with the impact of rats on the offshore islands. So you have the Antiguan racer. The rat would would bite the tail of the snake, and it has its reproductive organs in the tail. So most likely a lot of snakes ended up being sterile because of this. The photos on the other three photos are rats on Redonda, which I will talk about later. So they basically will kill hatchlings, and they, of course, are voracious eaters, so they will eat seeds and seedlings and so on. Okay, so I'm going to run through a few graphs to show a change in activity on the offshore islands. So this graph shows how breeding pairs of seabirds on the offshore islands were affected by the rats. So on the right, of the graph, you have islands where rats were still present and some where the eradication was basically very new. So notice on the left, all of these islands on the left, these islands were either rat-free previously or had eradications done. And so you had a lot more breeding seabird pairs on those islands. And it's also quite visible whenever you go to the offshore islands, the islands that we know they are still have rats, you will notice that you do not see much bird activity around these islands, but you will see a marked difference in bird activity on the other islands that are rat-free. Okay, so this graph, one second. Yes, so this graph, it shows basically that there was a very big increase in just 2 years. The Antiguan racer population more than doubled within 2 years on Great Bird Island. And over the period from 1995 to 2012, the population went from 50 all the way up to 900. So this basically was like an 18 times increase in the population. And also with this population increase, we're able to reintroduce the racer to 3 different islands: Rabbit Island, Green Island, and York Island. So also the lizards basically benefited from the eradication. We noticed during surveys that there was an average of 5 times higher density of tree lizards and ground lizards on these islands. We have the Antigua ground lizard, which is endemic to Antigua, that in the populations of the ground lizard and the tree lizards increased by up to 5 times. Also, the seabirds, they benefited a lot. You had an increase by up to 16-fold of some of the seabird populations. Benefiting most were laughing gulls, brown noddies, and sooty terns. And also the turtles benefited because as mentioned in the previous presentation, rats and mongooses do have an effect on nesting turtles. So it was noted that there was a 3-fold increase in nesting on these islands that have been made rat-free. Also, vegetation benefited. So you have a photo from 1995. You see the vegetation is relatively sparse. And in 2021, the vegetation increased by a lot. So we take fixed point photos to measure the change in the ecosystem over time, so you can get an idea of how your work is affecting the environment. And this is just another photo from another angle from the southern side of Great Bird Island and the same time period. Okay, so I will now move on to talk about the other program, the Redondo Ecosystem Reserve. So this program, its predecessor was the Redondo Restoration Program. That program was started in 2016 to try to conserve the wildlife that is on the island. So according to records, this is an artist's rendition of what Columbus would have seen in 1493 when he passed Redondo. But the British started to do mining on Redondo from 1865 to 1914. So they were mining seabird guano. So that gives you an idea of just how populated with birds Redondo was. And every year, about 7,000 tons of phosphate-rich guano was able to be shipped to the UK. So basically, Redondo was laden with bird poop. So Redondo, just like the islands in the NEMA, it's also globally recognized as an important bird and biodiversity area and a key biodiversity area. It was once home to 5 endemic species of lizards. 2 of them are extinct, the Redondo iguana and Redondo skink. We still have the Redondo dwarf gecko, the Redondo ground lizard, and the Redondo tree lizard. And all of these species are critically endangered. So this is a photo of Redondo back in 2008. You see basically maybe 1 or 2 patches of trees on the island. It basically looks like a moonscape. Here's another photo, another comparison. So on the left, you have 2016, just before the eradication. It looks basically like a moonscape. And on the right, this is in 2020, after this would have been 3 years after the rats and goats were removed. I also have a video I would like to show you. Hopefully it works. Okay, good. So this is a comparison of how Redondo looked in July 2016 compared to August 2017. So Note that the eradication was finished in April 2017. So the change you see in the environment is basically over a space of April, May, June, July, August, a few months. So the vegetation was able to basically bounce back very quickly, and also the animal species were able to bounce back very quickly. So this is a testament to how conservation, just removing invasive species, can cause and allow an ecosystem to bounce back very quickly. So another comparison, so you have 2012, you see it looks very much like the moon. In 2018, we had a bit of vegetation going back, quite a lot, I shouldn't say a bit. And in 2020, we have a lot more. And last two comparisons, 2017 and 2024, that's where the trees started to grow back. So the lizards, as mentioned, they basically bounce back as well. The Redondo ground dragon's population increased sixfold in 2019, and the tree lizard increased by 3 times from 2017. So this is just another graph showing how the population went from around, let's say, 750 to almost 3,500 for the Redondo tree lizard. Another graph showing the population increase for the Redondo ground lizard, just below 200 to nearly 1,600. And the birds, the seabirds, of course, basically benefited. Back in 2012, there were a total of 164 breeding pairs during the peak breeding season that were found all over Redondo. In 2019, they started to come back. You had 182 breeding pairs. And then in 2022, the number of breeding pairs increased to 218. So during the period of 2012 to 2016, there were only 2 species of birds, land birds recorded on Redondo, the peregrine falcon and the Zenaida dove. And there were sightings of the Caribbean martin in 2016. But as of 2019, there have been sightings of 14 more species on Redondo. So everything, the ecosystem is basically building back itself because of the reduction in pressure from the rats and the goats that were on Redondo. So after the restoration, we of course wanted to expand the program to make it an ecosystem reserve. So that was done in August 2023. Redondo became the Redondo Ecosystem Reserve. And this marine area, it's a protected area. It basically covers 115 square miles or 30,000 hectares. Redondo is basically 0.2% of the area, whereas the rest of the area is basically the marine space. So the idea behind it is to recognize the ridge to reach approach. By removing the invasive species on the land, it helps to affect the ecosystems in the sea because with Redondo previously being a rocky island, more prone to erosion, you would have different different conditions affecting, say, the coral reefs, the seagrass beds, and so on around the island. But once Redondo replenish its vegetation cover and so on, with less erosion, the seagrass beds, the coral reef ecosystems, and so on around the island should rejuvenate. And also you basically have ecosystems for fish. So these two programs, after we do and eradication. It's standard procedure. We know that ecosystems are dynamic, especially because of the interference of humans. So what we do, we install permanent bait stations on any of these islands that we have done an eradication on. So, and then we also have a schedule in which we do IS monitoring to help detect early detection and help to eliminate them as soon as possible. So for the OICP, we do active IS monitoring on 10 islands in the NEMA, in or close to the NEMA. And we do these activities every 4 to 6 weeks. EAG staff and volunteers are involved. And on these islands, there's a total of 170 permanent bait stations. And it's a total of about 71 hectares of habitat that we protect using the permanent bait station method. Redonda, it has 39 permanent bait stations, and we go over there every 3 months or so. Redonda has a more lax, I shouldn't say lax, but a more permissive schedule because of its relative remoteness compared to the offshore islands in the NEMA. The offshore islands in the NEMA are very easily accessible by boat, whereas Redonda, the safest way to get onto the island is by helicopter, and it's also very expensive. It doesn't mean that people cannot go there, although they should not at this current time, but it's a lot more remote, and so it's also very expensive to get there. So we think that's a sweet spot with our biosecurity work to make sure that the island has not been reinvaded. Another thing we do a lot of education about the offshore islands, how important they are to us. And when I say us, I mean any Antiguan citizens and internationally as well. So one of the things we do, we talk about what we call a biosecurity checklist. Before we go and interact with the offshore islands, we try to get individuals to check anything they bring with them over to the islands. So the bags, the footwear, the clothing, any gear you have on you. Make sure to have your food packed into sealed containers so that you don't attract any invasive species. If we are doing activities like camping, we make sure to shake out our bedding, check our tents to make sure we don't have any stragglers coming with us. And also we do checks on the mode of transportation, whether it's a boat or a helicopter. So one of the projects we are currently working on that we want to bring to fruition is the Offshore Islands Nature Reserve. So basically, the NEMA was established in 2005, and there has been a management plan made. Unfortunately, it's not being implemented. So the idea is that we would carve out an area of most importance to us within the NEMA and create a nature reserve that will help. It will have multiple use, and we would basically have public-private partnerships, and it would also be a source of sustainable financing for us. So this is a map of the proposed nature reserve. It would basically encompass Green Island and York Island and a little further north. So it would be 66.5 kilometers, square kilometers in size. The idea is that we would have the reserve as a no-take reserve, and it will have areas for recreational activities, scientific research, vessel mooring, which would help us to control any introduction of invasive species to the island, and of course, conservation. So of course, the invasive species monitoring would continue, and we would continue to do wildlife monitoring to make sure that the health of the wildlife on the island continues to increase. On York Island, basically it's a similar plan. We would have mixed use conservation and recreation. So for the challenges, so as mentioned before, the islands in the NEMA are major tourist attractions, and because we do not have managing status over this, it is quite difficult for us to basically control who goes to the islands and what they bring over. So we've had reinvasions from between 1998 and now, and basically 12 reinvasions. Unfortunately, because of lack of funding or say change in ownership status, some of these islands that were reinvaded have not been re-eradicated because either we don't have the funding at the moment to do so, or because of ownership change, maybe the owners don't want us to go on to the island. Other challenges we have are basically a combination of stakeholder apathy, ignorance, neglect, or simply different priorities. So to give examples of ignorance, apathy, and so on, we have a moderate problem with guinea grass infestation on Redonda. And that happened because a government official, not knowing better back in the early days, he basically brought guinea grass over to Redonda and spread it because he was curious to see what would happen. In talking to tour operators about the feasibility of the offshore islands nature reserve, there was an instance we were speaking to a tour operator, and he strongly believed that if we, for instance, had goats on the offshore islands, it would be great for the offshore islands. It would be great for an added tourist attraction. So his priority wasn't necessarily about keeping the island invasive species free. He was just thinking about the money. And also, we have island holders who will develop, like for instance, one of the Green Island currently has a restaurant, which could lead to a domino effect in terms of increased activity, because of course you would have people going over there, and basically would they be following the protocols for biosecurity checks and so on. Fortunately, we have a close relationship with the staff at the who deals with transportation, so they help us out a bit with making sure that the island remains rat-free. And of course, funding. If you don't have the money to continue IS control because of, other real world um, demands, it may not be as possible to do what is needed. So that is the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nathan, for that engaging presentation on the Environmental Awareness Group, EAG, and its conservation efforts. It's fascinating to see how invasive species like black rats and mongooses, their names have been coming up a lot as per the presentations, which were originally introduced for pest control, they ended up creating even bigger problems. It's also encouraging to hear about the positive changes that came with the removal of the rats, healthier seabird populations, better conditions for lizards and turtles, and even improved vegetation. The work being done through the Redonda Restoration Program and OSI Nature Reserve proves that managing invasive species makes a real difference, even though challenges make it difficult. With that, let's keep things going. Next up, we have Maria Hernandez, which will continue the discussion. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. As we said before, my name is Maria Elena Hernandez, and I'm from the Dominican Republic. And as it was said in the beginning, I work for the Ministry of Environment as an invasive alien species technician. So please, if you can help me with the presentation to share your screen so we can start. I'm really happy that Maria Fraser also explained in the beginning what is an invasive species, what is a protected area, because doing in the Dominican Republic, I thought about explaining it too as well, but because I was the third, I believe that someone else was going to do it in the beginning. So thank you so much, Maria, for that. Um, so mostly what we are doing right now is uh, a lot of work. We're only two people in the Ministry of Environment that work with invasive species, so it's a little bit hard for us. But I'm going to try to summarize what the work has been done since the beginning of this division that is in the biodiversity direction. So if you please can go to the next one. The Dominican Republic has had introductions of invasive alien species since the beginning of colonization. I believe that's something everybody in the Caribbean island might have in common is the arrival of rats with colonization. And a little bit different that is with us, we also have the Indian mongoose introduced in the Dominican Republic to compete, like to get rid of the rats. And I believe that that's also a problem for everyone in the Caribbean, and something that a lot of people said for the Dominican Republic is like, I don't know why you introduce the mongoose if they work in daylight and rats are mostly on nightlight. That was something that was said for us in the Dominican Republic. Uh, Another example is that in the 60s, the Dominican Republic's dictator made possible the introduction of raccoons and deer for the sake of recreational hunting on the Catalina Island and the east of the country, to the introduction of the green iguana in the 90s for pet market that I believe also is introduced in a lot of the Caribbean islands. It For us it was because of the pet market that was really strong in the 90s, uh, because we didn't have any environmental law. It's not until the 2000 that we have an environmental law that makes like kind of a reinforcement for the pet trade. So we have a lot of everything and a lot of anything. We currently have 49 out of the 100 most invasive alien species all around the world. You can see it in the IUCN made a list about the 100 most invasive alien species. We have 49 of them. Uh, there was mentioned before also like the lionfish, the tilapia, catfish, and I think we have a lot of things to do. So you can pass to the next one. The Dominican Republic, through the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, is currently working to mitigate the threat posed by invasive alien species. This ranges from community training, social media disclosure, to control and eradication campaigns. We're currently focusing on 12 species found in or near protected areas. Among the ones that I have mentioned, we also have rabbits in Valle Nuevo, giant sensitive tree, that has become a problem for us because it was trade. We believe it was trade because of the moving of I don't know. Let me see if I can show you a little bit. Let's just pause a little bit so I can show you the in the construction. Let me explain it. In the construction, we have so many trades with Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico had those plants. And when we trade the big manufacturer stuff, we had the trade of the plant as well. We have feral cats and dogs. I believe that it can be a problem for you as well. Giant African snail, that was one of the successful works that we have because it was a campaign between us, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Health. So we made like a pretty big job, a pretty big campaign for people to learn about that and understand that it's a health threat also. So it was a really good work, and the list goes on. If you can go to the next one, please. So one of the most successful works that we have is the mammal eradication in Lago Enriquillo Lake. The Cabrito Island is located between Sierra de Neiva and Sierra de Bauruco. It's like a really long jagged mountain chain. So you have an island between those two big sierra, and it's hypersaline, and it has low seasons of water. Like there's a small amount of water, and a lot of animals can cross. We had cows, donkeys, cats that go with people, that usually accompany people, and rats, obviously. So the entrance of mammal was due to the low water season, and animals may cross over the island. And after that, because it's hypersaline, a lot of the animals couldn't drink the water that was in the Cabrito Island, because we have a very, very specific kind of animals over there. We have the iguanas that can eat the cacti and things like that. We have most of the species that are in Cabrito Island are usually made for Cabrito Island. And as you can see in the third image over there are so many skulls. And due to low water supply, availability of food, and the presence of mammals, a lot of the animals died. And the thing is that I don't know if you know, but with cats, one of the there was a study made because of this program that someone made a study with the cats, and one of the second most consumed animal for cats are reptiles. And if you have two populations of iguanas in the island, we couldn't find any small iguanas or baby iguanas at the moment because of how big was the population of cats. And after we saw that problem, the mobilization of the mammals were many were taken out in cages, like with rats and the cats. And after that, they had to be like the donkeys and cows. They had to be taken out with like a leash or something like that in the moments of low levels of water. And one thing that happened with those animals is that most of them will die after they go back from the Cabrito Island, because they were so thirsty that they will die from drinking so much water. If you can go to the next one. Oh, sorry, I forgot something. If you can, and you don't have to go back. It's okay. Uh, After that, after the program finished, it was really, really good. We eradicated from the island, the Cabrito Island, all of the cats, all of the cows and the donkeys. You can now check like 2 or 3 rats, but mostly you don't see any kind of animal. We do have, as in Antigua and Barbuda, we have 3 month monitoring as well, so we can check with cameras and everything, so we can check if it's been a success, and it has been. So now I can go to the other projects that we kind of have. We have made impacts with the community, because as we have many public awareness campaign, giving lectures, for us we have 31 providence. So 20 of the out of the 31 have been given lectures, and we have a lot of social media posts too. In the Ministry of Environment, we have been working with the communications program, so we can let people know a lot more about the the invasive alien species. We also we have a meeting in different provinces. We have made 7 control brigades. So we have plant-based and animal-based people that work with us. So the 2 people that work here don't have all the job, or don't have to uh, go from one province to another, because we're in the capital. And if we want to go to the Cabrito Island, for example, it's like a 6 hour trip. And if you have, like, let's say you go to the capital and say, oh, we have this problem with this animal here, we have like 6 hours to go and try to solve the issue. And by the time that you go there, you might not have don't even uh, can see the animal anymore. So with the creation of the brigades, we can like assure that we can get most of the job done. And also, since the beginning of the green iguana removal in 2010, approximately 30,000 iguanas have been removed. If you can go to the next one. It's not always easy. We have so many challenges. We have limited resources. We have difficulties enforcing these regulations in protected areas. Uh, a lot of our areas are also recreational areas, like in the with the problem of Catalina, the Catalina Island that I showed you in the beginning, with the raccoons and the deer. The thing is that we have the second most turtles go to Catalina Island, and a lot of people also go to Catalina Island, and between the people and the raccoons and the rats that are in Catalina Island, it is a big problem for the turtles. And engaging the communities long term in biodiversity efforts, people usually don't count invasive species as much of a threat as climate change or deforestation as a casualty for biodiversity loss, even though it's one of the five things that affect biodiversity loss the most. People usually don't make like the connection between biodiversity loss and invasive alien species. So it's been really hard engaging the community in those long-term efforts. And also the association of feral animals with domestic animals. Sorry, give me 1 second. Sorry. Uh, the thing is that we have so many people that love their cats, love their dogs, and trying to get people to understand that a feral animal is not the same as a domestic animal is really really hard. We had so many meetings with people and associations of protecting animal dogs and cats to let them know that the feral cat is not going to be the same as the domestic cat, and it's been really really difficult in that case. You can go to the next one, please. But I mean, for the future, I'm kind of giving a little bit of a conclusion that can be a little bit more positive. As we look into the future, it's clear that addressing invasive species is not just about controlling them, it's about safeguarding our ecosystem, cultures, and livelihoods. By investing in prevention, raising awareness, and fostering collaboration across borders, we can protect our biodiversity and ensure a sustainable future for all species, including ourselves. So, thank you so much for listening, for attending here. And if you have any question, I'm here. Kimora, you are muted, I believe.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you for that insightful presentation. It's interesting. Seems like invasive species have been causing trouble since the days of colonization. They arrive, stuck around, and just like some bad house guests, refuse to leave. But thankfully, the Ministry of Environmental and Natural Resources isn't letting them overstay their welcome. With that, let's keep the conversation going as we move forward with our next segment, the Q&A. We'll now have the audience ask our panelists some questions.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. So I have, I guess, two questions, one for Nathan, one for Maria Fraser. Nathan, my question to you is, I'm interested to know how Antigua handled the eradication specifically of the goats. And my next question would be, how were the goats introduced? Is it was it introduced by residents? I mean, you could look further back and you could say colonization, but was it like residents on the neighboring islands using the island as a pasture for the goats? And for Maria, I'm interested to know, because the Indian mongoose is a problem throughout the Caribbean. I'm interested to know, um, have we in Guyana done anything to, I guess, track how the mongoose is interacting with specifically native species of birds, i- um, in Guyana or within the protected area?
Okay, so to answer your question, the eradication was basically a removal of goats from redundant. So they actually set up corrals and so on to capture the goats, and they took them back over by helicopter. It wasn't always simple because sometimes the goats would avoid them, so they would capture the young, and then the mother would come. So there's that. Your other question was how the goats got on. So the goats were brought on by the colonials, and also Montserrat is closer to Redonda than Antigua, really. And you'd have people who brought over goats basically as I guess to eat, to forage. Hope that answers your questions.
All right, so thanks for that question. That's a very, very good question. At this point in time, I really can't say if Guyana has done any work in terms of the effect on mongoose to the birds. Um, but it's something that I'll definitely look up and see if we've done any work. But as for now, I haven't seen or came across any of that. Perhaps the EPA might have would have probably did some how to say preliminary studies, but nothing fully in detail on a hardcore research of the impacts of mongoose on the bird population.
Thank you both for your answers.
Okay.
Okay, I see a question to me in the chat. What are other ways to curb down rat infestations? Uh, if you're speaking specifically about in protected areas, I think the main method that we would use is basically the poisoning method, using what we call claret bait. It's a slow-acting poison, and it's relatively humane. The other methods would be a bit less efficient, and also would be probably be less humane. So that would be the main method we use.
So I think I can answer the next two questions because the second one is from me. But hi, Shamir. Shamir was my roomie. So one of the things that we do to try to get people involved is that, as I said before, we do have some meetings and reunions with people from the communities to try to get them involved as much as we can. But as I said, one of the problems that we have is that people don't engage in a long-term base, and we do have a lot of people that can come up with us and try to give us a solution, and like try to give us dates and posts of when they have seen some animals or some plants that they believe that are invasive alien species. But it's like a few people. In regarding of the eradication of green iguanas, we do have a hunting culture, but it's not with invasive species, and it's not with iguanas per se, because we, like I said, it was introduced in the 90s and it was like a pet before, and then we have to let people know that it was a problem. And with the few hunters that we have, we do have two really big hunting like squad that accompany us when we are looking for iguanas, and they do most of the job. And the desire of meat, we do have people in the south part of the country that said that they prefer the native iguanas, the endemic iguanas, because they have tried both. Because eating iguanas for us was something that the Taino culture did before, and a lot of people stay with that culture. And people in the south eat the iguanas, but we are in the at the moment we are trying to let people know that the green iguanas can be eaten as well, and also convincing people that eating the green iguana is better than eating the native and endemic ones, you know. So yeah, that's most of the job that we do.
I could briefly add to the answer for Shamir. In Antigua, it's is difficult, to be honest. There tends to be a tug of war between making money and conservation. A lot of people don't necessarily see the importance of a long-term solution. They basically want money, they want jobs and that kind of thing. Also, when you have people who are basically set in their ways and how they interact with the offshore islands and so on, it's kind of difficult. You're not always there to be monitoring what they do. So you there may be some who do it, but to be honest, I don't think that would basically think, oh, I have to check my bags and that kind of thing. But we do try to do a lot of education in schools and that kind of thing. Hopefully, you know how children are when they learn something, they tend to basically become an earworm with the adults, and we hope that that message would spread to the adults and so on.
We have another question inside the chat for Maria.
Yeah, that was the last one that I answered.
Okay, great. I have one question for all three of you. What role can youth and conservation advocates play in raising awareness and addressing this issue about invasive species in their communities?
Sorry, can you go about the question again slowly for me?
What role can youth play in raising awareness and addressing the issue about invasive species?
Oh, I see
You
Maria
want
wants
to?
to go. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. And this I'll say it not as a person that works for the ministry, so it's more like a person that is part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. One of the things that I say the most about making the youth make some noise is more like read a lot, inform yourself, and talk about what you know. Let the people know about invasive alien species. Use your platform. It might be a small platform, but with mouth to mouth and sharing in the social medias, it's going to be something big. So if you start posting or learning and sharing about invasive alien species, a lot of people will know it too. Like a lot of the knowledge that my family has right now about invasive alien species is because of me. it's because I'm also doing my thesis on green iguanas. It's because a lot of the people that I involve are mostly biologists, and they are like getting some of the knowledge. And I saw my mom talking with somebody the other day, and she was like explaining to her that this kind of plant was invasive, and she learned it from me. So just listen, learn, and share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Just how we had, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I would pretty much reiterate what Maria just said. Education awareness is quite important as like I had mentioned, part of the prevention or mitigation part of it is or strategy, sorry, was to raise education. It always goes back to social media. Social media, it's how to say the modern day way of communicating. The moment that you start sharing information, people becomes aware, like, oh, I did not know this was an invasive species, this particular weed in my yard, maybe it's flower, or even, for example, the tilapia, they never knew about it. So it comes back again, research and education is very much important in terms of spreading awareness about any conservation topic or any topic in particular, not just invasive species.
So very quickly, definitely, youth can be instrumental. The EAG has developed two series of videos. It's called Into the Wild with the EAG. That's the first series, and Into the Wild with the EAG, the Coral Code. It's not specifically about invasive species, but it touches on how invasive species affect the offshore islands and also marine ecosystems. And also, the Department of Environment in Antigua developed a handbook specifically about invasive species to have in the schools. And as mentioned by my two other panelists, yes, it's all about education. Children, when they learn something, they tend to want to tell everybody. So they could definitely be very instrumental with mitigating, with spreading the message about how invasive species can be prevented, controlled, etc.
Okay, thank you to our panelists. Now I'm just gonna pass the ball to Tyrell Gittins from GYBN to talk about our membership. Okay, it looks like we have one last question in the chat.
Hey, sorry, the question was for Maria. Have any thoughts been given to an incentivized hunting program, especially for the species that can be consumed?
Oh, regarding the last question, it was the one that I answered together with Shamir once.
Sorry, Maria, someone sent it directly to me in error, so I put it in the
Oh,
chat
okay,
box.
okay, okay. Now I can say it, yeah. Oh, we can really look into that. We are looking for ways that we can add more people to our hunting squads and things like that. And we do have a lot of people that like and love hunting, so that's really great. And let me see, let me continue reading. Oh, okay, I can see that we also have like hunting seasons for some of the the species that we have, not the green iguana, not the deer also, but we do have some hunting laws that says that the people has to be Dominican and have to have a Dominican ID. So that might be a problem. It's not with us, it's with the hunting laws. And the salary cost is something that we have to discuss because, as we said before, we don't have the money right now, and I think a lot of people have that problem when they work with invasive alien species, the the monetary problem. So yeah, but it's really really good, really interesting.
Thank you, Miss Maria. Up next, we have Tyrell Gittins, who will be speaking about GYBN membership. Tyrell?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thank you so much to our panelists for taking time to join us this afternoon. Kimora for a fantastic job on this entire webinar. Um, it's really the product of the hard work of our given Caribbean membership on our events committee. So I want to give a very, loud round of applause virtually to the committee. I am part of the GYBN Caribbean team and a member of the Global Biodiversity Network. I just wanted to take a few seconds to encourage everyone age 18 to 35 to register for the chapter. I would have put the link in the messages there. We are very excited to continue the great work that the Global Youth Biodiversity Network is doing around the world in the Caribbean region. It's open to all countries and territories in the Caribbean, from north to south. And what we really are is a group dedicated to, the empowerment of young people to participate in environmental conservation and environmental decision making. So we will have webinars like these, training opportunities, and including opportunities to represent the region and our countries at different multilateral environmental conferences globally. So please, 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 we need all hands on deck. The dealing with environmental issues in the Caribbean is not something that any one person or one organization can do, and we just hope to contribute to the already amazing work that is being done in the region, as you could have already seen from some of our presenters today. So thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing some new faces in our chapter very soon.
Okay, as we wrap up today's webinar, I want to sincerely thank each and every one of you for your time, engagement, and valuable contributions. Your participation in these discussions is what drives meaningful action toward the protection of our biodiversity. Throughout this session, we've explored the impact of human interaction on protected areas and the challenges posed by invasive species. I hope today's insights have inspired you to continue these conversations and take steps, big or small, toward conservation and sustainability in your spaces. Before we go, I am excited to share that we have some amazing social engagement initiatives coming up. Stay tuned on our social page, GYBN social page, for opportunities to connect, learn, and take action together. A huge thank you to our panelists, GYBN Caribbean members, and our steering committee for making this event possible. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.